Hi, everybody. I'm Connie Colla, your Scottsdale Realtor and the owner of the Connie Colla Group at RETSY, a Forbes Global Properties partner. You know, if you've ever purchased or sold a home, you most likely have used a title company. American Title Service Agency is my team's go-to title company. They've been here in the Valley for many, many years. And today with us is Jim Stamas. He's the president of American Title. And Jim, you've been in the industry for about 35 years. Thank you so much for being with us.
I have, and thank you for having me, Connie.
Yeah. So, okay, everybody wants to know, what does a title company do? And you say there are really 6 points. And the first one is kind of bring everybody together. How so?
Right. So the title company basically administers the purchase contract for the buyers and sellers to make sure that everything that's required under the purchase contract is followed by us as the escrow administrator of the purchase contract.
Fantastic. And I guess the second thing is protecting those people in the transaction. And how do you do that?
Sure. We're a fiduciary, and really for both sides, to make sure that the parties' intentions are carried out and that we're a neutral, a more or less disinterested third party to the transaction.
Boy, that's really important because, you know, when you think about it, the buyer has the ability to choose the title company, but it's nice to hear that you're really representing both sides and making sure that everybody's protected and covered. I like that.
Yeah, and we're required by Arizona law to do that.
Yeah, it has to happen, right? Number 3 is that you kind of research and insure the property. Take us behind the scenes a little bit on that.
Right. So our title department is actually located right here in Maricopa County. We research the Maricopa County Recorder's records to make sure that the seller owns the property and that they can successfully convey that property to the buyer at the end of the transaction.
Yeah, because sometimes there might be someone who still has ownership to it. What's that called? Is it a dirty title or a crowded title?
Obviously, it's a defect in the chain of title, and when we research the chain of title, we are actually looking back from the beginning of time all the way through the last deed that recorded in that actual chain of title to make sure that the seller is who they say they are and that they can safely transfer to the buyer when we close the transaction.
Critical information. You don't want somebody knocking on your door later to say, hey, wait a second, you're in my house. Number 4 is the chain of title. Tell us what that means.
Right. So the chain of title, actually, we take the legal description that's actually on the purchase contract, convert that to a title order, and then have our examiners go back through the records to make sure that the seller owns the property and that we list everything that's against that particular chain of title. There's judgments, the liens, the CC&Rs, all those kind of things that are against the record. Those will show up in our chain of title, which is what we use to go further and go ahead and commit prepare the commitment for title insurance.
Yeah, so there are several different steps there that have to happen to make sure that you really do have a clean title and that it can pass without any issues. And it's very detailed when you're doing that work. So it takes someone very qualified. You want to make sure that you have a title company that's got a good reputation. So you create a commitment for title insurance. And what does that mean? If there's several parts there. Right.
So there's several parts to the commitment for title insurance. The first part is the Schedule A, which has the amount of the purchase price, the ownership of the property, what policies are going to be issued, and the legal description, which we took from the purchase contract. That's the first part. The second part is the Schedule B, Part 1, and that particular part has the requirements for all the things that the seller and the buyer have to do in order to transfer the property safely to the buyer at the end of the transaction. And then the third part is the Schedule B, Part 2, which lists all the exceptions to the eventual title policy that's going to issue to the buyer, and if there's a lender involved, the lender as well.
You know, when you start to say Schedule A and Schedule B, Part 1 and Part 2, I'm sure people start to gloss over. So this is why it's so important that you hire an expert, because they know exactly what they're doing on each of those lines. Holy cow, that's fantastic. It's good news that you got all those things down. So let's talk about then the owner's policy of title insurance. That's kind of the last step.
So the owner's policy of title insurance, that will show that the seller is entitled to the property only subject to those things that are listed as exceptions and that they've accepted. And mainly, if there's a lender involved, there'll be a lender's deed of trust, which is a first lien position on the title policy, and then all the exceptions come in after that, showing what the buyer's purchasing the property subject to.
Yeah, and sometimes people think with the owner's policy of title insurance that you're insuring something in the future, but you're really kind of insuring the past.
That's right. The title insurance policy is retrospective. In other words, it looks back. If things happen in the future, once the buyer owns the property, obviously those are things that have happened after we've examined the record. And so those are things that certain things have coverages and other things will not, because in other words, if there's a judgment that comes against the new buyer and that attaches to the property, then that's an act of the buyer. So that wouldn't be anything that would be covered under a potential title claim.
It's not under that policy. So at the end of the day, your job is to make sure that everything in the past is cleared and that the house can move forward and change ownership clearly. Jim, thank you so much. Jim Stamas, the president of American Title here in the Valley. Thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate you.
Thanks for having me, Connie. It's been a pleasure.
I'm Connie Colla, your Scottsdale Realtor and the owner of the Connie Colla Group. If you have any questions about the buying or selling process, give us a call. We're always here to help.